Okay, well, welcome back to the New Testament Journey, episode 17. I think that means we're about a third of the way through this year, which is amazing. And in this episode, what we're going to do is just finish off the last two chapters of the Gospel of Mark, chapters 15 and 16. And then next week in episode 18, we'll jump into the epic letter to the Romans. But we thought Mark 15 and 16 deserved its own thing, as does the start of the book of Romans. So it's brilliant to do a little bit of a deep dive onto a couple of these longer chapters, which are similar to some of the chapters at the end of Matthew and at the end of Luke, the Synoptic Gospels, portrayal of the crucifixion and a little bit of the resurrection, which we'll talk about. But Tom, what do you see in these last bits of Mark?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because we've got here just two chapters, really. And actually, of that, one chapter is about the cross.
Yeah.
And that, every chapter in the Bible's got value, but there's only a few chapters which have become the real symbol of Christianity, which is, I guess the cross rather than the fish. And so we want, I think it's just great to give it this focus. And so we get the narrative of the cross. And in Mark's Gospel, the key themes have been authority and compassion. And I think Mark carries that into his narrative of the cross. Now, if you think about, say, The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's film from, I don't know, what?
I think it was 2004, but it might be slightly off on that, but early 2000s.
And even now, most sort of passion narratives, there's a real focus on the wounds of Jesus. So if you think about the way that we present the cross, it will generally start with him probably carrying a cross and being whipped. It'll probably include lots of his blood. It will probably have a real focus on the crown of thorns being thrust onto his head and kind of bleeding, and the agony of the experience for him physically. Am I right? I mean,
for sure.
And I think something that's really interesting, I remember the Alpha Course used to do a huge amount of its content was on the physical agony of the cross. And then they updated it because really, if you look at the way that Mark describes the cross, it's not a focus on his physical wounds. They're almost indirectly involved rather than directly the point. The point is the rejection of Jesus' authority.
Okay, so back to that theme again.
It is the theme. So this is the theme all through Mark. And actually the horror of the cross from Mark's perspective is that a true king has arrived. And he has shown everybody he is the true king, and people after people reject his kingship. And so the horror of the cross, the evil of the cross, is that the king has been mocked, rejected and despised and ultimately removed. So it's a relational act of grievance rather than a physical act of grievance.
That's focused on.
Yeah, that's right. And so if you look at it, the temple leaders agree they're going to bind the king. The king. You can't just decide we're going to grab the king and tie him up, but they do. They put him before a Roman who's just a governor. He's not the king of the Romans. He's just a governor, right? He's not that big a deal. And they put him before him for him to determine what happens to the king, the true king. Then repeatedly you see the one thing that is over and over again in this chapter is Jesus being called King of the Jews. And often it's an ironic title that's put over him. You think you're the king, but you're not. But Mark only uses that one title for Jesus in all of this narrative. And so person after person reject the idea that Jesus is their king. They scorn him, they mock him, they beat him, saying, you thought you were a king, you made out that you were the Messiah, if you're the king, do this. You claim you're the king, but clearly you're not the king. And that is the horror and the evil of the cross. That people reject Jesus relationally as their king. In fact, they'd even prefer a failed revolutionary Barabbas to Jesus as the king. It's just the horror of the sort of the misunderstanding, the deliberate rejection, the arrogance, or the confusion. There's a whole massive array of reasons, but in every case, the result is they refuse to accept Jesus as their king.
Yeah, there's that quite poignant one, I think, of the Roman soldiers mocking him as a false king. Putting on a robe on him, kneeling down to him, and you read that and you see that, and it's like heartbreaking in a way. It's like he actually is, and you're mocking him, but there's more focus on that and that aspect rather than the scourge on the back or the nails that went through his hands, isn't there?
Yeah, and so that helps us when we look at what happened on the cross. Something that you may have come across, technical term would be substitutionary atonement, or penal substitution. And the focus there is really on the physical wounds. Like, how could the Father physically harm the Son? Yeah. And Steve Chalk famously wrote a book where he quoted something what the Jewish theologians used, talking about the Holocaust, but talked about cosmic child abuse. And of course, Jesus himself claims he chooses to go to the cross. It's his act. It's his deliberate decision. But more than that, actually, that makes it all about physical action. But what we see in the cross is it's not about the physical wounds. I mean, he clearly dies, and that's so important. But it's about the rejection. And actually, that's what Jesus cries when he says, my God, why have you rejected me, forsaken me? Why have you left me? It's like, God, you have made me the king, and even now you are acting like you are rejecting me as king. Yeah. And it's just for any person who's ever felt rejected by people they love, whether it's your mom or your dad, where maybe it's been a church leader or a small group leader, maybe it's been somebody who should have shown you care and attention, they should have looked out for you, and instead they turn away, or in fact they speak words of mockery. You know the horror of that. You know how deeply that wounds you. And that is what Jesus is going through on the cross.
That relational, and more than relational, but absolute outright rejection.
Denial of his identity.
Yeah.
It's like, you know who you are, and somebody says, that is not you. Who do you think you are, saying that about yourself? No. Who do you think you are? Like, you are an absolute... you don't even deserve to live. Claiming that for yourself. It's quite painful, isn't it? So that's what we see. There's one tiny hint in these chapters of something else happening, which is the Roman officer. Officer, interestingly, not a soldier, but officer. And he does this strange thing where he doesn't... This is the only place that King of the Jews isn't used. Okay. And he says, surely this man was the Son of God. Yeah. Which is fascinating, because that's actually not really a phrase that's been used in the narrative. And I guess what that does, it just shows that in every bit of Scripture, it's multi-layered. And although you can see authority as a key theme, compassion as a key theme, as soon as you start pigeonholing everything has to fit into this one thing, something will pop up that doesn't quite fit. Because that's life, isn't it? Yeah. And that's God. True. He's beyond us. He's always greater than us. There's always something about God that's just slightly defies any formula that we try and create. Yeah. It's
amazing. And even that little one, I mean, it just sparks a thought in me. I mean, there's a very interesting study, isn't there, on how the Roman soldiers and Jesus interact throughout the whole of the time. And we've talked about two today, but there's the other one with the healing of the centurion's son, and at different moments it's so interesting how Jesus, the true king with authority and compassion, interacts with the occupying power. There's a study to be done there for someone.
Andy, I would love you to do that for us. That sounds brilliant. But that would speak so much, wouldn't it, to anybody who's in an oppressed situation right now, which many of us sadly are. So let's just pull out really quickly some of the implications for us of the cross, because I think if it's all about the physical wounds, then it takes you some places which are valuable, but some implications perhaps of this actually primarily being about rejection of Jesus' authority, so the relational rejection. So one of the things I think would be helpful to acknowledge in this is what is the root of evil? So the cross is it's God's method of dealing with evil. And whether it's fashionable or not, what we see here is that the root of all evil is the denial of Jesus as king. So part of evil is physical violence against other people.
Yeah.
Part of evil is the desire to mock and destroy. But fundamentally, at the core, like if you think of the cross, and there's a Latin phrase which is used by theologians called Christus Victor, the victory of Christ, of the Christ. If you think of it like a moment when Jesus invites all forces, like the powers and the principalities and the rulers of this dark age, he invites them to gather around him. And if you've ever watched The Lord of the Rings, it's a bit like one of those moments like, let me get the name of the town right, Minas Tirith, which is in The Return of the King. Or equally, I think you get it at Helm's Deep. Like the hordes of evil all come together to surround this stronghold of good. And the feeling is, if we can just defeat this city, this citadel, this king of good right now, then evil will reign forever. And so what you see the cross as, maybe a helpful image, is in the cross, Jesus sets himself up as that stronghold of good, and all the forces of evil come and they gather around, and that's expressed through the Roman soldiers, expressed through Pilate, it's expressed through the religious leaders, it's expressed through his own disciples denying him, it's expressed through the crowds who say they want somebody else. And there's this kind of the forces of evil are all coming around the cross. And their whole goal of the forces of evil is to cause people to deny that Jesus is the true king of the earth. And if they can do that, they win. Now, that has two really fascinating things to really pull out. One is that there's evil is the rejection of Jesus. That is the biblical call on what it is to really agree with the forces of hate and stuff in the world. Now, what that doesn't mean is that every single person who isn't a Christian is evil. But what it does mean is that within the church, we have to safeguard the confession of Jesus as our Lord above everything else. And we want to declare to the whole world that every aspect of society, when Jesus is put as the way, when his way of doing things is enshrined, when his priorities are our priorities, when he is acknowledged as being the source and the goal of life, every aspect of society, whether that's banking or whether that's caring or whether that's parenting or whether it's sports or music, in every aspect, those aspects will be enhanced and become everything they're meant to be when Jesus is acknowledged as Lord in them. And when he's not acknowledged as Lord in them, there's still lots of good there, but it doesn't ever reach the potential. And in fact, there's the rejection of Jesus as Lord is an act of decay for that aspect of life.
I mean, there's a strong witness throughout the scriptures of the primacy of evil being the rejection of the Lord, which then is outworked in lots of other things. The classic Jeremiah quote: "You've rejected me, the fountain of living water, and then dug your own wells, which cannot contain living water." You think of some of Paul's other bits, turning from idolatry to serve the true and living God. The first thing is the turning away. And so you're saying that the cross is almost kind of a portrayal, a witness to the fact that ultimately humanity, we are rejectors of Jesus, and that's the primary evil that we commit. Yeah,
so if you think about, if you want to grow in your faith, if you want to move on with the Lord, part of the fundamental thing that you're looking to do is to make Jesus the king of every single aspect of your life. And if you want to repent of things, if you feel guilty about something, because guilt's a strange thing. Like, you can feel guilty because every time you did it, your mum shouted at you. So you can go and have a piece of chocolate, and if that was something that you can feel guilty about that. Or I was speaking recently about somebody who was in a church that taught that any drinking of alcohol is a sin. So every time they would have a sip of alcohol, they'd feel guilty. Now, guilt's a strange thing, because in none of those circumstances is guilt indicating actually an accurate indication of this is sin. So how do you determine that? How do you know what's good and bad? Well, you know ultimately that if something that you're doing is denying that Jesus is Lord, it's an act towards evil. And that can be done in many, many parts of life. Primarily, arrogance. I mean, there's many instances in church circles, in church culture, where we prioritise something above the acknowledgement of Jesus as Lord. For example, in worship, we make it about us feeling good, or let's do something that attracts as many people as possible. Let's make it something that feels fun. Now, all of those things can be great, but if that becomes more important than acknowledging Jesus as Lord, that's a move towards evil. And equally, every time that somebody says, right, I'm going to go into work today, and you might be doing a job which is quite mixed. You might be, say, I don't know, some people are, a lawyer, where you're actually having to advocate on behalf of clients who you think they're not doing great stuff. But if you go into that context and think, every act I take today, I'm seeking to do it in a way that acknowledges Jesus as the true King of the earth, you can just bring huge goodness into that environment. So that's the thing I'm trying to make. The decision of, is this a good thing or a bad thing to do, is, does this acknowledge Jesus as Lord, or does it not?
Because we see in the gospel portrayal, that's the root of the issue.
That is the root of the issue.
If you boil it down, and if you I mean, there's a brutality to the cross, but it's stark, isn't it? This is what happens. This is what at stake. It's like, either we crucify him, or we acknowledge him as Lord. So many, I think, we would love to think we'd sit down and have a nice meal with him and whatever, just have him as one of the guys. But it's more, his authority is more confrontational than that, isn't it? Either you're going to try and kill him, or you will bow the knee to him and say you're the Lord.
Or he'll take everything.
He'll
take the whole lot. Financially, sexually, relationally, things you say with your mouth, things you look at with your eyes, the things your heart's for. He wants it all. He wants it all. He wants to be king of it all. And if you give him it all, wow, the joy there is in that space. But he wants it all, and that's the thing. And then the second part of this Christus Victor thing is that the greatest strategy, like the kind of the genius plan of evil, is they all come together, they all collaborate with one another, and they win. They defeat Jesus. And they're like, yes, they've removed the king. And then it's like, for a whole day and a bit, mission accomplished. I mean, just the victory party that evil must have been having on that Saturday. And then God's like, well, it doesn't matter, because he is the king. He is the king, and he raises from the dead because he's the king. Like, you can't do anything about that. God has declared Jesus king of all the universe, not only of Israel, but of all the universe. And doesn't matter. And in a way, like, people will say, well, it doesn't matter whether you like the idea of who God is. I mean, I really like the idea of who God is. I think he's amazing. But it doesn't really matter, because he is the God. Jesus is the king. And, one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. That's the thing that comes out of these chapters. Like, because of this, like, it's not up for debate. Like, Jesus is the king of the universe. Everything is for him. Everything will be brought together under his lordship. All of the universe, that's the end of the world. The end of the world will not be Russia nuclear bomb on Ukraine. The end of the world will be everybody in every animal, like the squirrels and the fish and the mountains and the trees, everything, and the stars and all the parts of the universe we've not yet investigated. Every single thing acknowledging Jesus is the true King, and welcoming and celebrating and honouring him. You are the true King. You are the one that we were made to come under and to serve, and your leadership of us is just truly phenomenally amazing.
Yeah.
And that is the end of the world.
It's good news.
That's not bad, is it?
On into Mark 16, and there's an interesting thing, which when you did the reading last Tuesday it was, or whenever you did it, half the chapters seem to have this slight doubt over it. Should it be here or not? And in general, like you think, well, why isn't there chapters 17, 18, 19 about this resurrected king and what it looked like, more detail post-resurrection? You got any theories on that, Tom?
I've got a few theories on this one.
I thought you might.
Well, I mean, the key thing up front to remember is that the Gospels are written to serve a church that exists. Mm-hmm. So there is a church. Probably, I think Mark is summarising a lot of Peter's teaching, and so what. It goes into a church that already exists, so already has the Holy Spirit working among them, that already knows of the resurrection, that already meets together and does the Lord's Supper, that already sees signs and wonders, that already there's already Jews and Gentiles coming together, and the gospel is put in to furnish these people with the reminder of the teaching that Peter's given them on the life of Jesus. It's about this is who Jesus was. And so it ends in a strange way. Now, maybe some theologians, like for example Tom Wright, would say that we've lost the last few chapters of Mark. Maybe more. Maybe we've lost them. So that's a possibility. And obviously, lots of people agree with him because they've added these endings. Now, the short ending, I think, is probably
1 to 8.
So you've got 1 to 8, and then you've got the two alternate endings. So 1 to 8 we know for guaranteed was in every version. And then you've got chapter 9, and in this one it's got a different bit, but there's two alternative endings. And most people think the second, which is the longer one, which in most NIVs is chapters 9, verses 9 to 20, is probably the best version of an ending we could get. And what it seems to say is that this immense authority that Jesus had, he, as in his resurrection, and he'd already done a little bit before his death, he now passes it on. He puts the straps on the guy's shoulders. He's like, right, now you guys carry this authority, go do it, and signs and wonders are going to follow you, and the gospel's going to be preached, and crack on. And I think that's pretty good. And that's what we want, actually. That's what we want in our church, isn't it? Like, that ending of chapter 16, we preach the gospel about Jesus being king, and he confirms that he is the king by healing the sick, by casting out demons, by bringing clarity to minds, to those who are demonized to feel like, wow, I've dealt with my demons. All that stuff to be going on. That's what we want. And yet at the same time, I actually really love the fact that it could have ended at verse 8. Because the kingdom, the authority of Jesus has been given, but we also still live in a world in which these forces of evil that surrounded the cross, it's not like the Lord of the Rings, where the forces of evil that surround whatever that city was called, die and are gone. Now, the forces of evil are fatally wounded around the cross, but they still carry on. And so Satan still prowls around like a roaring lion. So we still have a battle against all the forces of evil. These things are still present. And what that means is that our authority is still being played out and used, the church's authority, in the midst of a battlefield, in the midst of forces of evil that are trying to destroy us and come against us. And so there's a mystery about the kingdom. There's a mystery about the use of authority, because at times you do something, prayed for people recently, and just, wow, it's gone.
Happens.
Pray for somebody else, it's gone, 3 days later it's come back. Pray for somebody else, seemingly nothing's gone. And there's a mystery to this. And the women see the resurrection. Victory has come. Jesus has defeated death, but what happens? They're trembling and bewildered. They're running around like, what? And I think that's a great indication of sometimes how we feel as the church. You see it. You know that Jesus has risen from the dead, but you're trembling and you're bewildered because you're like, but this isn't what I thought it was going to look like. I thought it wouldn't. I thought it wasn't going to be like this. And they still run and tell the disciples. You still do good stuff out of it, but there's this feeling of like, I'm perplexed.
Yeah.
And so our discipleship in small groups, hopefully in the New Testament journey, hopefully in life, is we acknowledge that this is a journey we're on, and there's space for doubt, there's space for disappointment, there's space to think, I don't get it, I'm bewildered, I'm trembling. There's space for all of that.
Yeah.
There has to be. The mystery of the kingdom has to be okay.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, Jesus is risen. We know the kingdom has come and will come, and there's absolute clarity about where the journey's headed.
Yeah. So good, so good. I think it's, one of the things I love the scriptures for, and we keep seeing it again and again on this New Testament journey, is it's so honest, isn't it? It's just like no spin, or it's a complete absence of spin or advertising. It's just, here's what happened, guys. Warts and all, bewilderment and all, bafflement and all. But that's what happened. And like you say, we can just take so much comfort from that, because it matches so often our emotional experience, which maybe something somewhere in us thinks, oh, it shouldn't be like this. If I really believed he was resurrected from the dead, I'd feel slightly different, or my life would look slightly different, or I wouldn't be bewildered, I wouldn't be baffled. But actually, right from the get-go, that was part of it. And another part of it is, they saw signs and wonders, people got healed, they spoke in other tongues, they were bit by snakes and they didn't die. I mean, there's nothing in that alternate ending that isn't elsewhere in the scriptures, is there? There's not really much to debate over it. But again, I think after we've done the study on the interaction with the Roman soldiers, there's one on emotional reactions to Jesus.
Yeah. And just landing this, if you're watching this, I guess my plea to you would be, please be somebody like Mark, who can make space for others to be honest about the reality of the authority of Jesus is real and is powerful, but there is this stuff going on in life. And, I've just had so many conversations with people who've basically said, I can't go to church because I have to pretend to be something I'm not. And I can't do that. I can't go through the emotional turmoil of, pretending that my mental health is something that it's not, or that my marriage is something that it's not, or that my interaction with my kids is something it's not, or my faith is something it's not. I can't do that. And we so desperately want to be a church and a community like the gospel, which, like, warts and all, we love it. We love it. Like, this is the kingdom journey, and we want you to feel that you can come and be where you're at. Like, it's going off on something now, but the old almost sacrament was of Christian confession, which is, I confess this is where I'm at. Now, confession isn't always saying this is wrong. It's just, this is me.
Yeah.
And we have, the Gospels makes huge provision for that, and we have to find a way to confess this is me.
Yeah. And
at the same time, this is me, and Jesus, this is you. And therefore, this is where you're going to take me, but this is me right now.
Yeah. There's a theory, isn't there, of the boy or the man who flees naked in the Gospel of Mark is actually Mark.
Yeah.
It's like, there's no way of confirming whether or not that's true, but I like the idea of it.
When we get to heaven, we can do a buttocks. No, that's not right. Forget that.
I like the idea that maybe the only thing he put in of himself was running away naked.
Yeah, and isn't that amazing though? Because it's like that's seemingly the beginning of his journey, and he makes it the repeated thing that whatever. Oh, you're the one. You're that one, are you? Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, it's humility.